Hello and good morning dear students and welcome to BYJU'S Exam Prep IAS. So we'll start with today's Hindu news analysis, and today we have a lot of very important articles that came in the newspaper. So in your detailed section, the detailed analysis section, we have 5 articles. The first article is regarding the UDAN scheme or the regional connectivity scheme that was started by the government in the year 2017. According to a research done by the Hindu newspaper, it has been found out that many of the routes under this scheme, they have become non-functional. The second article is regarding again the semiconductor industry of India, specifically the semiconductor design sector. Yesterday also we covered a part of it, but today in detail we'll take a look at the design sector under the semiconductors. The third article is about Israel. Now all of you must know that in Israel, a very important act was passed by their parliament. This act, it curtailed the independence of the judiciary of the country. So what it is, what will be the consequences, and does it mirror in any way the conditions with India? We'll take a look at that. The fourth article is regarding the human challenge studies. Now specifically because we just recovered from a pandemic, the World Health Organization has said that AMR, antimicrobial resistance, they will be very frequent in the future. So because of all those reasons, it becomes very important for us to increase our research in terms of availability of drugs and vaccines for various diseases. So in that regard, what are human challenge studies and why are they important? Why has the ICMR release some ethical guidelines for this particular thing? Now this topic, it will not only be important for your paper 3, but also you can get a case study in paper 4. I've prepared a small case study. We'll take a look when we take a look at the mains practice questions. The last topic in detailed analysis is this one. The threat of dengue fever, it has escalated globally. Many locations which earlier were not at all endemic to the disease, they are also experiencing increase in the cases. In the prelim bites section, we have only one article today, which is regarding the tiger census. Now in April, the preliminary report regarding the tiger census was released, where approximately 3,100 tigers were there in India. Now the final report has been released, according to which around 3,600 tigers are there in India. So we'll take a look at the various facts regarding the tiger census. So this is our first article. Turbulence hits UDAN scheme. 50% of the routes, they have been now grounded. So what is the issue? See, out of the 74 airports that have been constructed under the UDAN scheme in the past 7 years, only 11 of them, they were greenfield projects. What does that mean? They were built from scratch. From nothing, they were created. Okay. The rest of them, they were not greenfield projects. There were some already existing airports. There were some already existing airstrips which were redeveloped and designed by the government of India. So out of these 74 airports, 11 were greenfield and 15 of them, 15 which have been created since 2017, they have already fallen into disuse. Now in this article, you can clearly see the names of these airports. These are the greenfield airports, and there are also 15 airports, the names of these 15 airports which have fallen into disuse. So because of the lack of time, I'm not taking names of all of these airports. You can take a look, especially if you have geography optional, you definitely should take a look at these airports. So apart from that, there were certain air routes that were recognized by the government, over which they were providing subsidy to the private sector to have their flights, right? So there has been a collapse of almost 50%, almost half of these routes that were identified and that were operationalized under the regional connectivity scheme, okay? So out of 479 routes, 225 of them, they have now ceased their operations. Also, of these 74 new airports, that were made since 2017. 9 of them are heliports, where only helicopters they can land and take off from. 2 of them, they are water drones. That means the watercrafts. The water aircrafts, only those they can take off and land in these places. In fact, these 2 water drones, they have also become dysfunctional now. They are not functioning. There is no movement of people from one place to another in these water drones. In fact, since they were inaugurated in October 2020, there have been no flights from these water drones. Now, a little bit about the regional connectivity scheme. The UDAN scheme, or the Ude Desh Ka Aam Nagrik scheme, the common person, they should get accessibility to flights. See, there were 2 problems with the aviation sector of India. One was the accessibility, and the second one was affordability. The ticket prices in India, they were quite high. So many people, they were not even able to afford those high priced tickets. Also, amongst the people who were able to afford, they did not have proper access to any air facilities. If a person was living in, say, some tier 3 city and they had adequate money to spend on airports, they had to book their flights from some bigger cities which actually had airports, right? So there was an issue of accessibility. So the government of India, through the schemes launched in 2017, wanted to increase the accessibility and affordability of the flights for tier 2 and tier 3 cities. Most of the airports, they were concentrated in the bigger cities of India, the tier 1 cities. We wanted to expand the access to tier 2 and tier 3 cities as well. How was it done? It was done by subsidizing the routes. So this was the first step that was undertaken by the government. In the existing airports, which were underutilized, new air routes, they were identified, and government started providing subsidy to the private sector to start their airlines working on those routes. So first was done by subsidizing these routes. The second step was construction or renewal of the airports. So the routes, they were being awarded to the flight operators through a bidding process. So whoever won this bidding process on that particular route, say from city A to city B, so they were provided a viability gap funding by the government, which was equivalent to 50% of the seating capacity on their aircraft. So what they had to do in return for this? 50% of their seats, they had to sell the tickets for these seats at a flat rate of 2,500 rupees per hour of flight. So if the flight of place A to B, it was only for 1 hour, then 50% of the tickets on those flights, they had to be sold at a flat rate of 2,500. So if there was any gap in the ticket price, if the actual price that the person who is operating the flight, they had to express was 5,000 rupees, they had to sell the ticket at 2,500 rupees. The gap in this, it would be given by the government through the viability gap funding. There was also, under this UDAN scheme, a scheme set aside for 4,500 crore rupees to revive the old airports which had become dysfunctional, where the flights, they were not landing or taking off from, recarpeting their runways, erecting terminal buildings so that these airports, they can become functional once again. So of these 46 airports, they were redeveloped by the Airport Authority of India, and the remaining were developed by the state authorities, that is the state governments and the various public sector undertakings of the government. Okay, so there were two things. First, subsidy on the ticket prices. Second, development of the airports. So there were various phases of this regional connectivity scheme. The first phase, which started in 2017, it wanted to connect the underserved and unserved airports of India. So in the locations where airports already did exist, but there were not many air routes existing through that airport, they were targeted in the first phase. Then the phases second to fourth, they started targeting the remote regions. So phase 2, which started in 2018, it wanted to expand the access to the airports and the air routes to people living in remote and inaccessible areas of the country, where the airports, they did not exist. In phase 3, it was moved to hilly and remote regions. It started in November 2018. The phase 4 was for islands and other remote areas, started in December 2019. In fact, one of the airports which was recently in news, that is the Port Blair Airport, which was recently inaugurated and there was some damage on the airport, it was also constructed under the phase 4. Then the phase 5 was announced in April 2023. Under the phase 5, Category 2 and Category 3 aircrafts were to be targeted. That is the aircrafts which have seating capacity between 20 to 80 or greater than 80. Moreover, the government was not going to identify any routes over here. The private sector, they were given the freedom to identify various routes and apply for them to the government for subsidy. Moreover, to reduce or to prevent any kind of monopoly of any one operator on a particular route, this particular thing, it has been added. That is the exclusivity of operation that is given to an airline. For example, city A to city B. SpiceJet, they won the bid to travel for this route from city A to city B. Right? Now SpiceJet will be the only operator which will be operating flights on this route. Another operator like Indigo, they cannot start over there. So this exclusivity of operation which was given under this scheme, it will be withdrawn by the government if the average quarterly passenger load factor. What is passenger load factor? The ratio of passengers to the total seats. If the seats are 100, the passengers are 75, then this load factor will be 75%. So in case the passenger load factor, it is higher than 75% for 4 consecutive quarters, then this exclusivity will be removed so that no particular operator has monopoly on any particular route. Now what are the concerns? See, the government, it was going to provide subsidy to the various operators for underserved and unserved routes, right? However, where was the money coming from? The cost of this subsidy was eventually borne by the Indian Airlines only. They had to pay a regional connectivity scheme levy of 15,000 rupees per departure. So every time their flight departed from a route like a common route like Delhi to Bombay, they had to pay a levy of 15,000 rupees. Now the flight operators, they were not going to pay it out of their own pockets, right? So they levied this further on their customers. So they increased the ticket prices. So there was kind of a cross subsidization. In order to fly from city A to city B, which was an underserved route, I will have to pay a higher price for an already busy route. So there was a cross subsidization. So this was concern number 1. Also, of these 225 routes that have ceased operations, 128 of them, they shut down even before completing the 3-year period of the scheme. So government was providing this subsidy for 3 years to the flight operators. But 128 routes, they were so unviable that even after getting funding from the government, the airlines, they were not able to operate their flights from there. 70 of these routes, they were commercially unviable even after the subsidy. Even when government was giving the subsidy, they were unviable. Maybe the cost was 10,000 rupees, but they were getting a subsidy of only 2,500 rupees and they could charge only 2,500 rupees for the ticket. So they were effectively getting only 5,000 rupees, whereas their cost is 10,000, right? So they were not at all viable. For the remaining 58, they were cancelled by the government because the flight operators, they were not complying with the rules of the government. Also, for certain cases amongst these 58, the flight operators said that we won't be able to operate it and they surrendered their routes by themselves. Or in some cases, the airlines which won the bidding war for these routes, they shut down. For example, Jet Airways. So 97 routes, they shut down. Of all the routes, 97 of them, they shut down after the 3-year period. So what happened? Up until the government was providing the subsidy, the routes were viable. Once the government, they took away the subsidy, the routes again became unviable. So the companies, they did not want their profits to tank, so they stopped working on those routes. See, the objective of the government was that to create demand in those routes. So government said that if for 3-year period they can sustain the flight operations, the demand for flights in those regions, they will increase. So the footfall will increase, and thereby what will happen? The flights, they won't have to go empty from one place to another. All the tickets will be sold and the flight operators, they will get profit from those routes. But that did not happen. So the biggest problems were what? The airlines, they were not finding adequate footfall. So they had to operate semi-full flights. The flights, they were not completely full. Also, aviation sector, especially because of various reasons like COVID pandemic and related lockdowns, it is already under a huge stress. So it becomes difficult for them to operate the flights in loss position. Moreover, there are many fast trains like the Vande Bharat train, which are becoming a big competition for these flights. See, already the airports, they are a little bit far away from the city. So people, they have to travel to the airport at least 2 hours in advance. They have to stay in the airport. It will take some time for them to reach the destination and again to reach the final place, right? So in order to avoid this, what do? They take a train. It takes almost similar time for some routes. So that is why the competition for the flight sector is also increasing, and that again can be a reason why the UDAN scheme, it is not showing as promising results as we thought, right? So this is about the first article. Now the second article regarding the semiconductor sector of India, especially the design portion. The design aspect. One is design aspect, second is manufacturing aspect. So this article is about the design aspects. So the context is that under the second phase of the design linked incentive scheme for the domestic semiconductor sector industry in India, the government of India is considering to pick an equity stake in these companies. So we talked about this Semicon India mission yesterday, right? So under this Semicon India mission is the design linked incentive scheme. So under this, the government is thinking that any company which is applying for this scheme, the government could take a part of equity of that company in order to support that company sustain itself in the market. This will ensure that there is stable ecosystem for design of semiconductor chips in the country, especially for construction of a few fabless companies. What are fabless companies? These are the companies which are involved only in the designing part of the semiconductors. They are not involved in their manufacturing or fabrication. So basically they design the semiconductor and they outsource their fabrication or the manufacturing to some other companies. So India wants to develop these fabless companies as well, apart from the manufacturing fabrication companies for semiconductor sector. So what are the industry challenges? See, yesterday also we talked about how the biggest problem over here is the high amount of investment that is required for setting up any semiconductor design or manufacturing company. So this is a very high capital intensive company. There is a very high cost for fabrication, for upscaling manufacturing capabilities and equipments. See, we want to develop even thinner phones, smaller and more compact automobiles so that the fuel efficiency is higher. We want thinner and lighter laptops. So for all that, what is required? The chip size. It should also reduce. So that requires a high amount of research and development in the design as well as in the manufacture technology of the chips. So there is a very high investment that is required in that sector. Moreover, the return on the investments, they are quite delayed. So that means the gestation period for the returns, it is very high. In fact, according to NASSCOM, the National Association of Software and Service Companies, according to NASSCOM, it takes at least 2 to 3 years for any semiconductor company to launch their product in the market. Compare that to a software company. For software companies, this gestation period, it is very less. So they are easily getting the investors, whereas the semiconductor sector, it is struggling. This point I already covered. We are continuously trying to reduce the size of the chips to get lighter phones, lighter automobiles, lighter aircrafts, right, to increase the fuel efficiency. So this also requires an extensive amount of research. Moreover, there are certain supply chain disruptions which can dampen the investor confidence, like China banning the export of gallium and germanium, right, in certain cases. So for any kind of policy to work in this sector, it is necessary that the policy is thought of for a long term, because this is a long term investment, both with regards to money, that is capital, as well as skills. The skills for this sector, they require a lot of time. The people who have the skills, they have studied very hard for a very long period of time. Now the Indian chip designing sector, see, India is a hub of chip designing, right? We have very high skilled pool of talent, semiconductor design engineers. In fact, 20% of the global workforce, it is made up by Indian engineers. India produces almost 2,000 integrated circuit chips and designs. The designs of 2,000 integrated circuits and chips, they are released by India every year. But where is the problem? Where does the problem lie? See, most of the companies where these engineers work, even if within India, they are foreign players like Intel, Micron, Qualcomm, right? So the intellectual property rights India does not have any intellectual property rights on these integrated circuits and chips that are designed within India. These IPRs, they remain with these foreign companies. So there is very low proportion of intellectual property rights related to the design of the integrated circuits and the semiconductor chips that India holds. So that is one thing that the government wants to address. So this DLI scheme, the most important part of this DLI scheme is to indigenize the innovations. Government wants to support these design companies so that they can produce their own designs and get the IPR for them. What is the IPR? Related IPR for integrated circuits and designs. It is known as industrial designs. So this is a type of intellectual property right under which the intellectual property right for ICs and semiconductor circuits, it is given. So this scheme, it was introduced in December 2021 under Semicon India program, the Semicon India Future Design Initiative. It aspires, what is the aspiration of the scheme? The aspiration is to grow at least 20 companies within India with a turnover of more than 1500 crores in the next 5 years. We want to become a hub for semiconductor chip designs. So for this purpose, the scheme, it will reimburse up to 50% of the eligible expenditure, of the total expenditure that the companies, they undertake for establishment of such plants. However, there is an upper limit. What is that? 50% or 15 crore rupees, whichever is lower, that will be reimbursed by the government. Because of this scheme, already around 30 semiconductor design startups, they have been established in India according to data from the Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology. So what are the challenges and opportunities in front of India? See, the challenge is that we do not have a lot of venture capitalists or investors. They are type of investors who want to invest in the semiconductor sector, as I said, because of high investment and high gestation period. So like the software industry was able to attract a lot of investors to India, the semiconductor sector is not able to do it. However, will the government involvement in the sector help? Will the government equity in these companies help? See, there are dividing opinions with regards to this as well. Some experts, they say that the government's attempt to become an equity shareholder in any company, it will have only very limited amount of success, because these companies, instead of being associated with the government of India, they would want to be associated with some global names, so that they can get easy access to global markets. Also, these global names, they will invest in these companies in terms of dollars. So their valuation, it will also increase. However, conversely, some other experts say that government's participation as an equity shareholder in these companies, it will be very beneficial with regards to getting any kind of regulatory clearances. So any kind of regulatory clearances, land clearance for establishment of the company, or any kind of license, export license that they require, they will get it very easily because government is a equity partner. Also, in India, what is there? A trust with government. That's why all of you are trying to prepare for government exams, right? We have a trust in government. So this trust, it might be advantageous to these companies as well. Because the government will be supporting these companies, it will be easy for other investors as well to invest in these companies. Also, these companies, they will be able to market themselves as a government partner, so many other customers, they might be interested in their product. Moreover, this will give a fallback option to these companies. It will prevent these companies from selling their majority stakes to large global players who will become the investors. So if a company, it wants to increase the scale, it wants investors, right? Now, if there is external investor, then there might be a possibility that the majority stake of the company, it might go to a global player instead of an Indian player, right? So that is also one concern that government wants to address by becoming an equity partner. Also, this will encourage the small players, the local small and medium-sized firms who do not have very extensive access to the global markets, to the global investors. The government can partner with them and help them grow forward. So this was about the second article. Now we come to the third one. This is a very interesting one, and there is a very good mirroring of the conditions that are going in Israel and what had happened in India and how it was prevented by the courts of India. Okay, very good mirroring. We'll take a look at that in the last portion of this topic. So the context is, on July 24th, the Israel's governing coalition, the Israeli government, they passed a very critical part of its judicial overhaul plan in their parliament known as Knesset. Indian parliament is known as Sansad, or we generally in English call it parliament. In Israel, it's known as Knesset. So this approval, this passage of this act, it was done with a majority. 64 out of 120 members, they agreed for it. So this will, what will it do? It will curtail the Supreme Court's oversight power of government decisions. So any kind of decision that the government takes, the Supreme Court can question that decision on the basis of reasonableness of that decision. However, the passage of this particular part of this plan, it ensures that the Supreme Court, it loses this power. See, back in March, Benjamin Netanyahu, he had said, the head of state for Israel, he had said that we'll be talking with the opposition members and we will withhold passage of this plan. However, the talks with the opposition, they failed, and that's why on July 24th, this particular plan, it was passed. So, because of this, there are now widespread protests that are ongoing in the country of Israel. So what is this bill exactly about? See, this is abolishing something called reasonable doctrine, which the top court of Israel, it has often used to identify whether any decisions of the government, they are reasonable in nature or non-reasonable. Okay. In fact, in many countries like UK, like Australia, like Canada, this doctrine of reasonableness, it has been used legally, it has been legally valid to be used by the top courts in order to prevent excess power going to the parliament of the country, to keep a check on the powers of the parliament. So Israel, it does not have a written constitution. This is something that you need to note, because we have a section where we are comparing the constitutions of the world with constitution of India, right? In GS paper 2. So this is important, that Israel, it does not have any written constitution. So what does that mean? that the court, it cannot measure the decisions of the government on the basis of the constitution, right? They do not have any document on the basis of which the government, its functioning can be identified. So they are using this reasonable doctrine so that the government is working properly. It is not breaching the limit of power given to it. The court could also determine whether a government decision or a ministerial appointment, it is sensible, fair, and nullify it if needed. It will ensure that all the government decisions, all the appointments of the ministers, they are not done through conflict of interests. The interest of people, it needs to be at the core and the heart of any government, right? The top court of the country, it used to ensure this using this doctrine. Apart from that, there are certain other proposals as well within this judicial reform plan of Israel. What are these other proposals? First is curtailing the power of judicial review over legislation and empowering the parliament to override any kind of court decisions, even those taken in the past, if this proposal can be passed by an absolute majority. That is, out of 120 members of the parliament, if 61 of them agree to this, then any kind of court decision that was taken even in the past, it can be overridden. Also, the government wants to take or seek a greater control in appointment of the judges. So what is happening right now? Right now, the judges, they are appointed through a committee. So this committee includes 9 members, out of which 3 are the judges, already Supreme Court judges, plus out of which 1 is the president of the Supreme Court, whose counterpart in India would be the Chief Justice of India. So 3 judges of Supreme Court. Apart from that, 2 members of the Bar Association of Israel. Then 2 members, they are from the parliament, and 2 members, they are representatives of the government, that is government ministers. Now what does the government want to do now? The government wants to replace these 2 members of Bar Association with 2 public representatives that will be picked or nominated by the government. So what will happen? The government will get a majority amongst these 9 members which are appointing the judges. 6 will be government people, right? So government will get a majority even in deciding who all they go to the Supreme Court. Another proposal is that right now what is happening, if ministers, they take any advice from their any legal advice from the legal advisors, then they have an obligation to follow that advice. The government wants to do away with that obligation as well. So why is this being done? See, what is happening over years, the polity of Israel has changed. So right now the majority members of their parliament, they are the right wingers. That is the more conservationists. Whereas the same thing did not happen in case of their judiciary. So what is happening? These right-wing people, they are calling out the judiciary because the judiciary is barring them from taking any decisions with regards to the social structure of Israel and also with regards to expanding their territory or expanding their settlements in the area of Palestine. So these people, they are not happy with the way the Supreme Court is working and it is blocking their legislative and governmental pushes in these regards. However, the Israeli opposition, which eventually walked out when this particular proposal was passed in the parliament. So Israeli opposition and their civil society, they are saying that the government is trying to undermine the democracy of the government. They are trying to convert this democracy into an absolute theocracy. What is theocracy? When people, they are being ruled according to the rules of the religion. Right? So they are blaming the government for converting the democracy into an absolute theocracy. So what will be the future of this thing? Future of this thing, first is that the civil society people, they have already filed petitions in the Supreme Court asking it to strike down this particular legislation. The Supreme Court has accepted this case, and it is saying that they will review these challenges and ask the defendants, that is the government, to submit a response 10 days before the first hearing occurs. But the biggest issue, the irony here is that the Supreme Court will be hearing a case where they will be judging whether or not the government's decision regarding the powers of the Supreme Court itself is correct or not. So there is a dichotomy over here. Okay, so we do not know what will be the future of it, whether this will be allowed or not, because this is a very weird situation. The Supreme Court will be hearing whether or not its powers should be curtailed or not. Okay. Now, what are any similarities with India? See, in India also, there have been efforts to reduce the power of judiciary. In some times, the judiciary was more powerful. There was judicial activism, judicial overreach. At some other times, the executive was very powerful. In 1973, in the Keshwanand Bharti case, the Supreme Court of India, it gave the basic structure doctrine that some structures or some parts of the constitution, they are very basic to the idea of India and they cannot be changed. However, in 42nd Constitutional Amendment Act, this curtailed the judicial review powers of the High Courts of India. Moreover, this particular amendment, it gave unlimited power to the parliament to amend any parts of the constitution, even those that had been called as the basic structure of Indian constitution. However, the 44th Constitutional Amendment Act, it reversed all these decisions in the year 1976. Later on, the Minerva Mills case of 1980, in that case, the government said that constitution and not the parliament of the country is supreme. So constitution, it is the most supreme document of the country. Even the parliament is not above the constitution. Even the Supreme Court is not above the constitution. Also, it said that judicial review, fundamental rights and the directive principles, they are a part of basic structure. Not judicial review. They are a part of basic structure of the constitution and they cannot be played around with. The government, it does not have unlimited right to amend the constitution of India. So this limited the amending power of the parliament over the constitution. And it said that this limited power of amendment is a basic principle of India's constitution. Okay, you cannot have absolute power. Also, Schedule 9, which was introduced in 1951 to put away from judicial review certain acts of the parliament. For that also the Supreme Court said that any laws that are under this schedule will be and placed under this schedule after 1973 Keshwanand Bharti case, they will be open to examination by the Supreme Court if they violate the fundamental rights or the basic structure of the constitution. So you can see how in India also a similar thing was tried by the government, but the Supreme Court, it clearly stated that nothing can be above the constitution. However, in Israel, they do not have a written constitution, and what will be the future of this in the Supreme Court, we'll have to take a close look at that as and when it happens. Now, this is another very interesting article, especially in light of so many vaccines and drugs that are coming in the market from the pharmaceutical sector for various diseases. So there are various types of trials that are done by the pharmaceutical industry for the development of these drugs, pharmaceuticals, for understanding the type of the disease. So we'll take a look at that as well. So the context is that the Bioethics Committee of the Indian Council of Medical Research, it has recently posted the consensus statement for ethical conduct of controlled human infection studies, CHIS, which are also known as human challenge studies. So the Bioethics Committee, what is the Bioethics Committee? It is an advisory unit of the ICMR. See, in field of medicine, a lot of things are all about trust. You tell your symptoms to the doctor and you trust the doctor that they'll give you the correct medicine. You trust the hospital that they'll give you a proper healthcare facility, right? A lot of things, they are dependent on the factor of trust. The patient is trusting the medical community. So in many cases, this trust, it can be misused, violated, right? So to prevent that, the Bioethics Committee, it has come into being. So this Bioethics Committee, it reviews the various policies, reports and other documents, and it also encourages various institutes across the India to improve communication and build capacity regarding ethics in healthcare. So it reviews those documents and ensures that they are properly ethical, and they also ensure that the institutes involved in medicine, they are also properly following those ethics. This committee, it also collaborates with the national and international institutes across the world for promotion of ethics in the field of medicine. So what are the human challenge studies? In the human challenge studies, what happens is that the human beings, they are exposed directly to the disease in order to learn more and more about the disease, how the disease, it spreads, how it develops in the body, how it can be cured. So this is not a very new phenomena. It is not like we are the first country that will be conducting the human challenge studies. They have been in place for hundreds of years. In fact, in early 1900s, the human challenge study on yellow fever, they helped us identify that this yellow fever, it is the vector-borne diseases passed on by mosquitoes. Right? However, in India, it has never been formally done since independence, and that is why this consensus document has been recently released by the ICMR. Now, these are conducted, as I stated, to understand the various facets, the various things related to the disease, how it develops, how it spreads, how it can be cured, how it can be prevented. What is the need in India? Need for these challenge studies in India. See, in India already the disease burden for many infectious diseases is very high. The mortality due to these diseases is also very high. So if we have proper challenge studies, we'll be able to get a better understanding about various endemic diseases. Diseases which are endemic to India, whose home is India. We'll try to understand about them. We'll be able to identify how the people get infected, how the diseases they transmit, what is the disease pathogenesis, that is how the disease is developing in the body, and how it can be prevented. It will also help in supplementing the already existing clinical trials which are done for the various drugs, for approval of various drugs and vaccines. Now many infectious diseases, they are endemic to India. Not much attention is being given to these diseases in the developed world, because the developed world, which has the money for the research, they do not care about these diseases because their people are not getting infected by these diseases. So it becomes important for India to help itself, right? We want to help ourselves understand more about these kind of diseases. Also, the antimicrobial resistance. The World Health Organization has already stated that this is one of the top 5 global health threats to humanity. So as this antimicrobial resistance is increasing, we need more and more information about the various pathogens, and these human challenge studies, when naturally humans are being exposed to these pathogens, they will definitely help us in improving our levels of knowledge about these diseases. Now, what is the difference between traditional and the challenge studies? Now, traditionally you must have read how even for COVID vaccine, a lot of trials, human trials were undertaken. For all kinds of drugs and vaccines, human trials are already undertaken. So what is the difference between these traditional trials and the human challenge trials? See, first you'll have to take a look at this point. See, traditional clinical trials, they are undertaken to study whether any drug, whether any vaccine, it is safe and effective on human beings. Whereas these human challenge studies, they are done to study about the disease, not the impact of the medicine or the vaccine, but about the disease, okay? Also, nature of exposure of pathogens becomes important. In the normal traditional trials, you are not being exposed to that disease deliberately, right? You are given that drug, you are given that vaccine, and you are asked to take necessary precautions. If that particular disease hits you, then what is the impact? What is the level of security that that vaccine is providing you? That is judged over here. In the challenge studies, the participants are deliberately exposed to these disease-causing pathogens. Also, while the adverse effects, they are not known in both the cases, even in the traditional trials, when the first level human studies are done, we do not know what will be the benefits or the adverse effects of the drugs or the vaccine. Even in human challenge studies, we do not know what will be the impact of pathogen. However, volunteers in this human challenge trial, they experience an additional risk, because in the traditional thing, you are being exposed to a vaccine or a drug which has already been tested on animals and it has been found to be safe over there. Here, you are getting exposed to a pathogen directly. Also, one very important thing over here is that the human challenge studies, because you are being exposed to a deadly virus or a deadly pathogen, that is why these studies, they are conducted only for less deadly diseases like influenza, dengue, typhoid, cholera and malaria. Traditional studies, because they are regarding the preventive measures and the curative measures, they can be done for any kind of disease. Also, any safeguards, are they being followed in case of human challenge studies? See, except in very rare cases like in SARS-CoV, like in COVID-19 case, where we required these challenge studies, in other countries these challenge studies occurred in order to get more information about this virus so that we could prepare a vaccine for them. So apart from this, this was a one-off case. Apart from this, these studies, they are only conducted for known, well-known and well-studied pathogens. Moreover, there needs to be a clause, is that there needs to be an availability of a rescue remedy. For example, if you know that this particular medicine, it can be used for this pathogen. If a human challenge study is being done for this pathogen and the volunteer, they start becoming very extremely sick, then this rescue remedy can be provided to that volunteer. In case of COVID, remdesivir was used as this rescue remedy. However, later on it was found that remdesivir is not that effective on the COVID virus. Now, what are the ethical challenges with regards to this? First is that because the participants are being deliberately exposed to these diseases, so the risks, they are quite high. So they need to be properly informed about these risks. For that case, the ICMR in its guidelines said that any person for human challenge study, they need to be healthy between the age range of 18 to 45 years. Moreover, children, pregnant women, lactating women, or women who are trying to conceive, they would not be allowed to take part in these studies. Children in certain cases might be allowed where the issue is only, where the disease is only striking the children. Also, the participants who have any pre-existing medical conditions, they are to be excluded from any such challenge studies. However, in many cases what happens, these people, they do not have complete idea of their medical history, of their medical conditions. So in those cases, it needs to be ensured that proper medical examination needs to be undertaken. Now in some cases, this particular thing, it might be overseen. So that is the second challenge. What is the third challenge? See, according to the consensus statement, the information about what amount of money will be paid to these people, what will be the insurance amount, it needs to be, it cannot be mentioned, the amount cannot be mentioned. However, it needs to be mentioned whether or not they will be paid. Why the amount shouldn't be mentioned? It shouldn't be mentioned so that the people, despite having any medical conditions, only because they need money, they should not take part in these trials, to prevent such poor people from taking part in these trials just because they want the money. Okay. Now this is something that was violated in Bhopal when Covaxin trials, they were done for the first time in the city, and the people and the amount that the people will be getting, it was clearly stated in the form. Okay. So this is to prevent what? Poor people from entering these trials only because they want money. And second, the pharmaceutical companies which have very deep pockets, they can give extra amount of money compared to their competitors to the people for their own drugs. Also, it is very important to have a rescue remedy. This is very important. Based on the number of volunteers they have, they should have adequate amount of rescue remedy available for all the participants. Lastly, it remains to be seen how informed will be this informed consent for human challenge studies, because there are many vulnerable sections in India. There are sections like children, like disabled, like elderly, who might be forced to attend these human challenge studies even when they are not willing to. In cases of children, we cannot even identify whether or not their informed consent is actually informed, right? So that is another, that is the fifth challenge in front of us. So now we come to the next topic, the last topic, about dengue. See, the dengue disease, this dengue fever, it has increased, its outburst has increased in all parts of the world. Even in locations where it is not endemic, the number of cases over there, they are increasing. So this particular disease, dengue, it is a highly prevalent infectious disease. According to the World Health Organization, almost 400 million people suffer from this disease every year. The virus that causes this disease is the dengue virus, DENV. It is an RNA-based virus. of a Flaviviridae family. So this information can be useful for your prelims. Now there are 4 types, 4 strains. Like in COVID, you had Omicron, you had Delta, right? So there are 4 strains of the dengue virus as well. Strain 1, 2, 3 and 4. Out of this, strain 2 is the most deadly. Also, if you get any one strain, if I get infected from strain 3, then I'll get a lifetime immunity from strain 3. But after getting infected from strain 3, if I get infected from strain 4 or strain 1 or strain 2, then my condition will get severe and it can be life-threatening. Okay, so the vector of this disease is Aedes aegypti. Now this particular mosquito, it also spreads other diseases like yellow fever, like chikungunya, like Zika and Mayaro. Okay, so this is also an important information. So in 2023, what is the outbreak level of this disease? Since the beginning of 2023, many regions in America, they have witnessed a very high outbreak of this disease. Countries like Argentina, Paraguay, Uruguay, Chile, Brazil, Peru, Bolivia, they are experiencing very high number of cases in their countries. In fact, countries like Brazil, Peru and Bolivia, they have recorded over 2 million cases of the disease. Several countries in the Americas, the biggest issue is that they have experienced the outbreak of multiple strains of the disease. In some cases, it is all 4 strains that are circulating at the same time. So if a person is getting strain 2, they are getting cured, but then they are also exposed to strain 3. And in that case, the condition will become even more deadly. Even in European Union, because of the changes in the climate, like increased amount of heat waves, a lot of flooding, hot summers, this region is becoming very popular for the mosquitoes. So mosquitoes are easily able to breed in these regions. So European Center for Disease Prevention and Control has said that there is an increase in the number of dengue infections all across the European Union region. In fact, in 2022, there was a very significant increase in the number of acquired dengue cases within Europe. Also, in July 2023, Egypt's Kenya province, it also reported an immense outbreak of the disease. Sudan also, both Egypt and Sudan, they are not endemic for the disease. The whole Middle East region is not endemic for the disease because the conditions are just hot, which is not conducive for mosquitoes. Mosquitoes required hot and humid conditions. So that is why the Egypt and Sudan outbreaks, they are also a big concern for us. In India also, because of the heavy amount of rainfall, the number of dengue cases, they are increasing day by day. Especially in states like Kerala, Odisha, Assam, Tamil Nadu, Maharashtra, West Bengal and Karnataka, large number of dengue cases, they are being reported. Now for India, dengue is an endemic disease. It has been occurring in India for many years. It is not new for India. So what are the preventive measures? See, public health infrastructure, it needs to be strong to address any kind of issues related to dengue. There should be proper availability of the medicines for the people. The number of beds and medicines, they should be available. Also, apart from that, individual awareness and responsibility also is very important. Now, especially during the rainy season in many of your states, there might be certain advertisements on the TV to asks you to check whether or not water is getting accumulated at various locations in your houses, right? You need to remove that accumulation of houses. You need to maintain personal hygiene. You need to maintain cleanliness in your surroundings in order to ensure that dengue does not spread in your area. Second preventive measure is vaccination. Now, vaccination is a bit challenging thing. We'll take a look in the next slide. Also, we require an extensive amount of research and collaboration in these cases, because due to climate change, what is happening? The disease is spreading to new areas. Also, the second issue is antimicrobial resistance, that is spreading all across the world in many cases of various diseases. So that is why we need extensive research and collaboration in this regard. With regards to vaccines, the very reason why we do not have many dengue vaccines is that this vaccine, it should work on all 4 types or all 4 strains of dengue, right? So as of now, only 2 dengue vaccines, they are available at a global scale for usage. One is dengue, which is created by a French company known as Sanofi. However, this particular vaccine is only valid for people who have had at least once a dengue infection. For people who live in an area where majority population has been previously infected, so that they should have a herd immunity. In people who do not live in such regions, or for people who have never had dengue infection, this vaccine, it won't work. It will increase their risk of severe dengue. Next is Q-dengue. It is established or created by a Japanese company known as Takets. It can be used by anyone, even people who do not have any infection history. So as of now, we only have these 2 candidates. Now in India, a lot of research is also being done for this particular disease, and recently, in March, India's first and only DNA vaccine candidate for the disease of dengue, it has showed very promising results in the preliminary trials. So this particular vaccine, it is being developed by the National Center for Biological Sciences, which is located in Bangalore. Now quickly we come to the prelims bites section. Now it is about the tiger census. Revised data for the census has been released. So India's tiger population, it has now increased to 3,682. You can see consistently since 2006, the tiger population has been increasing. The average figure for the population ranges between 3167, which is the minimum possible population, to the highest possible population. The average is 3682. The highest number of tigers, they are found in the state of Madhya Pradesh, which is followed by Karnataka and Uttarakhand. 1/4 of the total tigers of India, they do not live in the protected areas. They are outside the protected areas in other forested regions. Apart from that, the tiger reserves, there are 53 tiger reserves in India, which make up 2.3% of Indian land. Amongst the tiger reserves, the Corbett National Park of Uttarakhand has the highest population of tigers. Also, this is followed by 2 tiger reserves in Karnataka known as Bandipur and Nagarhole. Now, where have we seen an increase in tiger population? It has been seen in central India, in the Shivalik Hill region, and in the Gangetic Plains. There has been localized decline in certain areas of Western Ghats, and there has been a decline in the population in states of Mizoram, Nagaland, Jharkhand, Goa, Chhattisgarh and Arunachal Pradesh. So according to the report associated with the census, the parks or the regions which undertook various conservation activities, they fared well in the tiger census. In fact, 35% of the reserves, they urgently require an increased amount of protection for the tigers, habitat restoration and ungulate augmentation. This is what the prey of the tigers. There should be adequate prey population in the region so that the tigers, they do not start fighting for territory. Since 2014, the number of India's tigers, it has seen an increase of 5 to 6% each year. But the experts, they clearly state that in the future, this increase, it will be lower because there can be only a certain amount of population that can be sustained for tigers, because tigers, they are very territorial animals, right? So their population, it cannot increase beyond a point. So now we come to the mains practice session. The first question, evaluate the success and failures of the regional connectivity scheme of Government of India. In brief, you can talk about the regional connectivity scheme of India, the various phases of it. Then in case of successes, you need to say that many locations which are earlier not connected via air routes, they now got connected. See, in the failures, we clearly saw that many routes, they have stopped working, but some are still working. That means the demand was still there. What is the role of the government? To ensure that people get all the facilities. So they started this particular work to see whether the people, they have demand for air routes or not. In many cases, they did have, in some cases, they did not. So this was kind of an experiment. The second question is, critically analyze the need for government intervention in the semiconductor design sector of India. You can clearly mention that it requires high investment, high gestation period, and that is why government involvement would be very important as an equity partner. Apart from that, this will also help in getting regulatory clearances. It will also help the MSME sector with regards to this sector. Last one is regarding the ethics paper. You are a researcher at a prominent private sector pharmaceutical company. The government has recently released the consensus policy for human challenge studies. These studies would benefit your firm immensely with regards to development of new drugs and vaccines for the diseases. You have been asked by your senior to write a report on the ethical challenges posed by the human challenge studies and solutions for the same. What will you include in such a report? So this has been adequately covered in the slides above. You can take a look over there. So with that, we come to an end to today's session. Do not forget to head to our Telegram channel because a quiz has been prepared on all this for you over there. So thank you very much and I'll see you all tomorrow.